Intention may make promises, it may sound noble and even feel purposeful, but it cannot carry the weight of transformation. Emotion fades, intention wavers, obedience remains. Obedience is not a feeling, it is a decision. It is a posture of the will, a disciplined alignment of your actions with truth, even when your feelings scream the opposite. Obedience is what separates the dreamers from the doers, the inspired from the transformed. It is the bridge between hearing what is right and living what is right. Without obedience, change remains a theory. Without obedience, growth stays locked behind the door of comfort. Without obedience, the gap between who you are and who you could be never closes. People often confuse inspiration with transformation. They hear a powerful message, they feel deeply moved, they write in their journal, they post a quote, and they think that something significant has happened. But nothing has happened until you obey. Nothing has changed until you act. The moment of conviction is not the moment of change. Conviction is only the invitation. Obedience is the response. Conviction without obedience becomes guilt. It becomes weight you carry, knowing what you should do but continuing not to do it. And the more you ignore conviction, the more calloused your heart becomes. Eventually, what once cut you deeply begins to feel normal. The voice that once stirred you begins to fade into background noise. Real change demands more than inspiration. It demands a willingness to submit your preferences, your comfort, your timing, your pride, and even your understanding to a higher truth. Obedience doesn't ask, "Do I feel like it?" Obedience asks, "Is it right?" It doesn't wait for the stars to align. It doesn't wait until the fear goes away. It acts in spite of fear, in spite of weakness, in spite of uncertainty. Obedience is raw. It's uncomfortable. It's often unseen and unrewarded in the short term. But it is the only path to lasting change. Emotion may initiate, intention may strategize, but only obedience moves the needle. You can have all the right information. You can have the best mentors, the clearest goals, the most beautifully written plans. But if you are not willing to obey when it's hard, when it's inconvenient, when it costs you something, then none of it matters. Knowing what to do is not the same as doing it. Wanting to change is not the same as changing. The distance between knowing and becoming is obedience. The life you long for is not found in your feelings. It's found in your follow-through. Obedience is not glamorous. It often looks like small, thankless acts repeated over time. It looks like saying no when no one is watching. It looks like showing up when you're tired, when you feel unseen, when you feel like quitting. That's where real change begins. Not in the moment you feel inspired, but in the moment you choose to act on what you know is true. Many wait for motivation to obey. They wait for the right emotional state. They wait for a wave of energy, a moment of clarity, a strong push. But obedience doesn't wait for motivation. It creates momentum. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It teaches your heart to follow your will. The lie that you must feel it before you do, it is one of the greatest enemies of growth. Obedience trains your emotions. It disciplines your desires. It builds the kind of strength that inspiration cannot. And over time, as you continue to obey, your feelings begin to follow. But if you wait for your feelings to lead, you'll rarely move forward. Intention alone cannot carry the weight of transformation. You may intend to be better. You may intend to change your habits, to fix your mindset, to speak differently, to love more deeply, to pursue your calling. But intention without obedience is a mirage. It gives the illusion of progress while anchoring you to the same patterns. People spend years circling the same mountains, caught in cycles of desire without discipline. They talk about change, they pray about change, they plan for change, but they never obey the hard instructions that lead to change. The uncomfortable conversation, the painful confession, the cutting off of distractions, the early mornings, the self-denial. These are not inspired moments, these are obedient decisions. and they are what create real transformation. Obedience is the test of sincerity. It's easy to say you want to grow when growth is a concept. It's easy to commit when the cost is still theoretical, but obedience demands action before you're comfortable, before you're certain, before you're applauded. It demands that you step forward when your knees shake, that you take responsibility when it would be easier to blame, that you surrender control when everything in you wants to cling to it. Emotion doesn't do that. Intention doesn't do that. Only obedience can do that, and only obedience can change you at the core level, because it forces you to act against your lower instincts. It forces you to train your body, your thoughts, your reactions, to align with truth even when your flesh resists change that is not built on obedience is shallow. It doesn't last. It might look impressive for a moment. It might attract attention, but when pressure comes, when circumstances shift, when temptation arises, it crumbles. Because it was built on inspiration, not conviction. It was fueled by feeling, not fortified by faithfulness. Obedience is what roots you. It's what builds inner strength. It's what creates the kind of character that doesn't sway with every wind. It may not be flashy, but it's faithful. And faithfulness always bears fruit. Even if the harvest takes time, obedience teaches you to trust something greater than yourself. It requires humility. It requires you to admit that your feelings aren't always reliable, that your perspective is limited, that your comfort is not the highest priority. It trains you to walk in alignment with principles that lead to life, even when everything in you wants to compromise. It separates the emotional highs from actual transformation, and it produces the kind of change that doesn't just make you feel better, but makes you become better. Real transformation doesn't happen in a single moment of passion. It's forged in the fire of obedience, in the daily choices that no one sees, in the repeated steps taken when the path isn't glamorous. It's in the yes when it would be easier to say no. It's in the silence when gossip wants to speak. It's in the integrity when shortcuts tempt. It's in the work done when motivation has left the room. That is where change becomes real. That is where identity is shaped. That is where purpose is discovered. Not in your emotions, not in your intentions, but in your obedience. Taking the first step requires courage, not certainty. Most people wait for everything to line up before they move. They wait for a clear sign, a full plan, a safety net, a guarantee that things will work out. But life doesn't hand out blueprints. Destiny doesn't send a checklist, and waiting for certainty is the quickest way to remain stuck. The truth is, clarity often comes through movement, not before it. Understanding grows with action. The road becomes visible as you walk, but that initial step, that brave, trembling step into the unknown, requires something deeper than strategy. It requires courage. The kind of courage that rises not because the path is easy, but because the purpose is greater than the fear. You don't need to know everything to begin. You don't need to have every detail mapped out. You just need to be willing to trust that the first step is worth it, that movement matters more than perfection, that risk is part of the process. Courage is not about being fearless. Courage is choosing to move forward even when fear is loud. It is understanding that fear is not your master, and that uncertainty is not a reason to disqualify yourself from progress. There is no such thing as a perfect beginning. The longer you wait for one, the further you drift from the moment you were called to start. The first step is always the hardest because it forces you to leave what is known. It pushes you out of the comfort zone that, though unsatisfying, has become familiar. It requires you to confront your own doubts, your own limitations, your own excuses. Taking that step means facing the possibility of failure, of being misunderstood, of being judged, of discovering that the journey ahead is longer and harder than expected. But it also means opening the door to growth, to learning, to strength, to experiences that you could never access from the sidelines. Courage isn't loud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like quiet resolve. Sometimes it looks like showing up again after being disappointed. Sometimes it looks like speaking truth when silence is safer. Sometimes it looks like pressing send, or walking into the room, or saying yes to something that scares you. These are the moments that shape your life. These are the steps that define your direction. And every time you take one, you build resilience, you build confidence. You teach your heart that you are not a prisoner to fear. There are countless people with incredible potential who never get past the starting line, not because they're incapable, not because they're unworthy, but because they let the need for certainty keep them paralyzed. They told themselves they'd begin when they were more ready, more sure, more supported. But readiness is not a prerequisite, it is a result. It's something that is developed through doing, through learning, through stumbling forward. If you keep waiting for the fear to leave before you start, you'll never begin. The only way to silence the fear is to prove it wrong through action. You may fail. In fact, you probably will fail in some way, but failure is not the enemy, inaction is. Failure teaches, failure refines, failure exposes what needs to grow, but inaction steals your time, it robs your potential. It builds regret, and it multiplies the voice in your head that says you're not good enough. When you take the first step, you are not guaranteeing success, but you are guaranteeing growth. And that growth is what prepares you for the next step, and the one after that. You do not need the approval of everyone to begin. You do not need applause. You do not need everyone to understand your journey. Often, the beginning is lonely, the step is taken in obscurity, and the path is walked in silence. But those moments are sacred, because they are the crucible where your strength is born. The people who wait to be noticed before they move often never move. But those who choose to act in faith, in conviction, in quiet determination, they are the ones who eventually shine, not because they were handed a spotlight, but because they built their light through obedience. It takes courage to begin when no one believes in you. It takes courage to act when the risk feels bigger than the reward. It takes courage to speak when your voice shakes. But every act of courage builds something eternal in you. Every act of courage chips away at fear, at doubt, at the lies that have kept you small. And the more you move in courage, the more your identity shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who waits and start becoming someone who leads. Courage is not a one-time event. It's a daily discipline. It's waking up and choosing to take the next step even when yesterday was hard. It's refusing to let setbacks define you. It's deciding that fear does not get the final word, and courage doesn't always look like bold, public acts. Sometimes it looks like small, private obedience. Sometimes it looks like staying when leaving feels easier. Sometimes it looks like beginning again after failing. But in every form, courage is movement. And movement creates momentum. When you look at those who inspire you, those who have accomplished things worth respecting, you will find a common thread. They started without knowing how it would end. They acted without having all the answers. They stepped into the unknown with shaking knees and uncertain outcomes. But they stepped, and that step made all the difference. That step marked the beginning of a journey that changed them. The people who change the world are not those with all the information. They are those with enough courage to take one step when it matters most. Don't let your mind convince you that you need everything figured out before you move. That is not faith, that is control, and control is often the mask of fear. Let go of the illusion that the future must be fully known before you begin. What you need is not certainty, it's conviction. What you need is not a full map, it's a decision to obey, to act, to begin with what you have, to take the step while your hands shake, to move forward without all the lights being green. You have waited long enough. You have overthought, overplanned, overanalyzed, and all it has done is exhaust you. What you need now is not another strategy session. What you need now is to move, to trust that the path will unfold, that provision will come, that strength will be given. Not before you begin, but as you begin. That's how transformation works. That's how breakthroughs happen. That's how legacies are built. One step at a time, not in certainty, but in courage.